so busy teaching women to be submissive and not deprive their husband sexually and be chaste and modest and all that with meek and quiet spirits. That takes a lot of time.
Right now, you're one of the most based women on the internet. Based, just based.
Hi, and welcome to or back to my channel. I'm Kit, and here we talk about the harmful beliefs and ideas that come from religion, red pill, and so on. And today we're discussing JustPearlyThings and the Transformed Wife, the crossover no one expected. And yet, maybe we should have. JustPearlyThings is a red pill YouTuber, and the Transformed Wife, aka Lori Alexander, is a conservative Christian blogger. You might not think initially that they have much in common, but their content is strikingly similar. Pearl preaches to men. Sure, she has some women on, but let's be honest, her audience is mostly male, about how awful women are, and Lori preaches to women about how awful women are. And though both use different sources, Pearl says society, Lori says Bible, they both come to the same conclusion. Women are nothing without men, and it's silly to pretend women can do anything on their own. Pearl has been making the rounds and burning a lot of bridges lately, but she and Lori really seemed to bond over their misogyny. And I have to say, I wasn't looking forward to this video. It's over an hour long. And then I realized it's highly unlikely that this whole video will be anything worth listening to. But given that I literally say I talk about harmful beliefs that come from religion and red pill, and Pearl is red pill and Lori is religious, I do feel something of an obligation to talk about their collaboration. On that note, we won't be commenting on the whole video because yes, it was painful. These two wander and ramble, and it's difficult to get to a coherent point. But it will be linked below if you would like to watch it in full. Let's start with the thumbnail, which is of 4 women holding a sign that says women. And then there's the text, "This is stupid," with an arrow pointing to the sign. Pearl is also in this thumbnail, looking perplexed, and I'm not really sure what this thumbnail is meant to convey. And the title is just as bad. Gender equality is pointless. So women are stupid and that's why they'll never be equal? Women are stupid for wanting to be considered full humans? Is that what we're to take away from this lazy graphic and title? Also, if you didn't watch the video, you wouldn't know this was an interview with the Transformed Wife. Pearl has a team. I don't understand how this could be so lackluster. Anyway, yes, Pearl did choose to wear a tube top while interviewing the Transformed Wife, and no, the Transformed Wife didn't say anything about it, though normally she has a lot of opinions about modesty. Anyway, let's get into it. And before we do that, I just want to note that I don't know Lori or Pearl, and these are my thoughts and opinions. I'll also have sources below as they make a lot of false claims. Also, I would like to note that when men or Christians are spoken of in this video, I am not speaking in general. I'm talking about men and Christians that agree with Pearl and Lori. All that being said, thank you for joining me, and I would like to give extra thanks to my patrons. Pearl opens by welcoming us to the sit down where she apparently has guests from all walks of life. She greets the Transformed Wife and asks if she uses her real name online, which proves that Pearl is generally unfamiliar with Lori and that she is capable of manners when she wants. Pearl goes on to admit that she doesn't know the Bible through and through, but she thinks Lori is one of the few that teaches true biblical submission. Lori agrees and says God is specific in that it's supposed to be the aged women who teach the younger, and then she goes off on a rant.
But it's all throughout from the very beginning of time that we were created for our husbands, for their helpmate. God has an authority structure. Our culture was so much better when men ran America, but then women were unhappy with the way men were running it. They thought they knew better. So they fought for the vote, even though a small, tiny minority wanted the vote. They wanted to be at home they were busy at home taking care of their families and children, and they had no desire to be in politics and have the vote. They wanted their men to take care of that. But the small little group of suffragettes fought for it, got it because they knew better. And now women overwhelmingly vote Democrat for abortion.
I would love to know how America was better when men ran it, and also how Lori figures they no longer are. And also, just because you have rights does not mean you have to exercise them. If you want to stay home with your family and not worry about voting, you're free to do so. However, just because you disagree with someone does not mean you get to take away their rights. Anyway, Lori goes on to say the last 3 Democratic presidents were horrible, so Biden, Obama, and Clinton. Funny how those are all men. Lori thinks that Trump, another man, was probably the best president in her lifetime, and he was hated because he was so masculine and a fighter, but she admits he did say really stupid stuff. Lori doesn't want to get into politics though, so she goes back to her point that women want to rule because they think they know better. And this is weird to me because is she trying to say that men, especially men seeking positions of power, don't think they know better? Lori trots out the tired lie that women destroy things because we're emotional and men are logical, and then she says that women probably fight Pearl more than men do. So interesting. It's almost like Pearl is talking about women, thus women respond. So strange. Really. Incomprehensible.
I've been attacked. You know, they always say we're all afraid of men, right? I've only been attacked, like, I had a girl threaten to punch me once. You know what I mean? Like, that's never happened to me by a man. All these women that are afraid of men, I'm like, I'm afraid of you guys.
No one is saying women have to be afraid of men. The issue is that most women have had experiences with men that make them afraid. It's great that Pearl hasn't had those experiences, but that doesn't negate the fact that most women have. And I don't understand the point of sending threats of any sort, but when your business model is trashing women, women are mostly going to be the ones pushing back. Laura uses this as a springboard into talking about how her son had to guard a girl when he played basketball, and the things she said to him were worse than anything a man had said to him. I think this is supposed to be shocking, but my response is something along the lines of, "And?" I know what they're trying to say, but it only works on those who think women aren't people. Pearl uses this to trot out another tired claim.
And that's the thing, like, they act like we're all sweet and innocent, but I'm like, I am not afraid of the men. Like, even if you say something that men would not like, and feminists do it all the time, they'll say men are trash, men are this, men are that. You don't see men attacking the women saying that.
Who is the they that claim women are innocent angels that can do no wrong? The only people I can think of are gender criticals who seem to operate on the belief that women are better than men, and that is why trans women are bad and trans men are lost. However, they are not feminists. There is nothing feminist about insisting men are one way and women are another, and in their effort to exclude trans people, they have a tendency to align themselves with conservatives, which leads to the women they claim to care so much about losing rights. And let's be honest, there are multiple large accounts, over 100,000 subscribers, across social media blaming women for men's problems, the world's problems, which is dehumanizing and leads to violence against women. And who calls that out? However, these same people are quick to comment when they see a tiny account bashing men, and they take that small account and apply it to all women, and it is not the same. There is a reason these small channels are small. Most people don't want to turn patriarchy into matriarchy. Most people don't want to enact vengeance against men as a whole. And people like Pearl and Lori are not helping. They are both telling people that their anger against women who are just living their own lives, is justified, and women need to be subjugated before they ruin society even more. What do you think telling the world that women are the ones ruining society does to people's attitudes toward women? You can see it everywhere, not just in those channels that are dedicated to women's wrongs, but even in those channels that claim they just want to help men, which is a subject for another video. And as a woman, it is scary and disheartening to see, but I'll put a pin in it here. I'm unpinning myself to add a little rant. First, if Pearl thinks men don't say anything to women, I don't think it's even that she's just mistaken. It's that in her quest to paint men as angels and women as demons, she can't acknowledge these things. Men say things to women just for existing. And for that matter, I've been asked to account for women who say things against men as if we all share some sort of hive mind. I'm only accountable for what I say and do, not other people. I have no control over them, and I have no idea how they got to where they are. And now begins the rant. I am so tired of people acting as though accounts with 1,000 if that followers is the same as these mega accounts with thousands of subscribers. And on that note, if you dislike what someone is saying, you probably shouldn't try to amplify it by mentioning their account. I can talk about Better Bachelor, Roma Army, Pearl, Biblical Gender Roles, 21 Studios, and so on, because they're so large that there is nothing I can do to amplify them. If you're here waiting for me to do a video on smaller channels that hate on men, you're going to be waiting a while because I'm not doing videos on channels around my size that I disagree with, because that could actually get them more traffic than usual, and that could tell the algorithm to pick them up. And I don't want to do a Cody Co and Girl Defined. I'm still miffed, but I'm putting the pin back. and Lori says women have a desire to rule over men, and she tried to control her husband before a book corrected her, and wouldn't Pearl hate someone who tried to control her all the time? Fascinating stuff. It is bad to try and control someone, but per these two, it's bad if a woman tries to control a man, but natural and God's will for a man to control a woman. But I forgot.
Isn't that what feminists say men will do if we give them the power? They'll just try to control us all the time.
They do say that, but I don't think some men do, but I don't think most men have that in their nature as much as women wanting to control men.
So there you have it. Men don't want to control women as much as women want to control men, as we can see throughout history. Oh wait. Lori talks about men mostly just want to lead their family, and she gives tips for how to make a man a leader. And then she talks again about how women think they know best, and look at where we're at now. And what?
Yeah.
It's the women who are doing all into the transgender garbage and changing their little boys to girls because they don't like men. It's just awful.
Women are doing transgender stuff and changing their little boys into girls because they don't like men? How does Lori think that kid came into existence? I would love to see a source for that claim, but sources aren't needed on Pearl's channel. Speaking of Pearl, she goes off about how trans women are the result of women receiving power and control, and I would like to know what power and control women have when men are still the majority in positions of power. Lori jumps in to talk about how trans women dominate women in sports, but adds that they're still not better than men, and again, citation needed. She goes on about how children recognize their fathers are the authority in the home, whether the mother allows it or not, because men are larger and stronger, and I'm still wondering how someone can be considered a leader or natural authority when they need permission to be such. And then Pearl asks the big question: what is the true definition of submission, and what should a submissive marriage look like? Everyone seems to have a different answer for this, but here's Lori's.
Submission in the Greek, I don't know Greek, but I've heard this from my husband. He said it's mean to come under, like in the military, to come under, and to submit to them, to willingly allow them to lead and to obey them. I know people hate that word, but two heads make a monster. Every institution on this planet has a leader. You can't have two presidents. You can't, every institution, every company has a boss. And the family is an institution, and God made the husband the head of the household. He leads the household in the way that he wants, unless it's in sin. Like a woman just asked me this morning, my husband wants me to take the birth control pill. I said, well, you don't have to do that because it can cause abortions. It has horrible, horrible side effects that can destroy your health. You don't have to do anything that's harmful like that to yourself, or murder, So,
right.
But it's just letting your husband lead. And it's not really that difficult, and practice makes perfect. And it's funny because even if women are married to disobedient husbands, the solution that God gives them to win their husbands is to be submissive to them.
So there you go. Women should just step back and let men do whatever, unless it involves birth control. I found this a bit vague, but lucky for us, Lori gave a more thorough answer on her Instagram. What is submission in marriage? Does he prefer your hair long or short? Some husbands don't care. Does he only want you to wear dresses? Some don't care. How does he like you to keep your home? How does he want the children educated and disciplined? How many children does he want? Does he want you to be on an allowance or not? Does he want to keep the checkbook, or does he want you to do it? Do you make the food he likes and keep it in stock? Does he prefer mostly homemade or takeout? Wives are commanded to submit to their husbands in everything except for sin. Wives are to be obedient to their husbands in the little and big things. Their husbands are head over them and their family. They are the leader and will be held accountable for how they lead. Yes, you can give your opinions, but don't argue or fight with him if he doesn't want to do it your way. Learn to have a meek and quiet spirit that wants your husband to lead, since as you submit to him, you are submitting to Christ. So, yep. The man decides everything unless he doesn't care, and then you can make your own decisions. And men are apparently stand-ins for Jesus. Pearl asks for some examples of what Lori would do before she became a submissive wife, because apparently Pearl thinks some women who claim to be submissive wives actually aren't, based on their interactions with other supposedly submissive wives. So Pearl, who is unmarried, is now going to judge other women based on how submissive they act to other women? Lori gives an example that doesn't answer the question at all, but she concludes by saying that you'll know by the way the wife treats the husband in public, and I can tell from Pearl's expression that that was not the answer she wanted. She was really hoping for some sort of, if they do this, they're not submissive, so she could hit back at the tradcons in her comments. And now for something a bit different.
Yeah, I had a recent red pill where I realized I'm like, most women lead relationships, I think, in 2023. Because I was thinking about how women make 80% of consumer buying decisions. And I'm like, that means women are making, like, whether it's a car, a house, like they sell to the women, meaning the women are making all the decisions in the household for the most part. And I was like,
Yep.
And so a lot of stuff like you think is traditional actually isn't, because the man can't make a decision without the woman arguing about it in a lot of relationships I see.
So, because women make most of the buying decisions, they're leading relationships and are arguing with men about what to buy, that's not what that statistic means. Of course, this is apparently just what Pearl sees around her, and I'm a bit curious about who she hangs out with. But anecdotes still aren't data, and you can't draw that conclusion with that statistic. But that is how Pearl works. She draws her conclusion first and then looks for data to back it up, even when said data has nothing to do with her conclusion. Anyway, then Lori chimes in.
And they said that before women's right, women couldn't have their own credit card. And that was really to protect the women, because when women didn't even want that, because men took their credit. If they got into debt, it was the men who had to go to debtor's prison. It wasn't the women who got. So now, since women have their credit, they own 2/3 of the $1.7 trillion student loan debt.
So first, debtors' prisons were unisex. And second, coverture was not a good thing. And third, debtors' prisons and coverture did not exist in the same time as credit cards as we know them today. They so badly want to paint women as fiends angelic men were freeing from consequences for their decisions that they're willing to try and rewrite history. And as for college debt, I'll link a study below explaining how women end up with more student loan debt. Anyway, Pearl jumps in with her story.
I remember being 18 and like picking a college, which I'm gonna talk to you about this too. But I remember thinking, like, my dad was like, do you want the more expensive one where you'll have debt, or the cheaper one where you won't? I picked the more expensive one. Why would I pick that? And luckily, my dad's business kind of took off, so I didn't end up having any, but that was just because, I was lucky.
Yes, she was lucky, but rather than reflecting on that, Pearl says that even though she's considered more logical, she's still a woman and she just wanted to go to that college and figured she'd pay off the potential debt later. This segues into a discussion about how it's now the American way to have debt, and Lori talks about how when she went to college, well, she didn't want to go, she wanted to get married and stay home with her babies, but her dad insisted she go, though he wouldn't let her mother work. But when she went to a private Christian college, it was $3,600 a year for everything. Pearl asks if Lori thinks women should go to college, and unsurprisingly, she says no, because they're all, including Christian colleges, just indoctrination centers to make women become feminists with leftist ideals. And then there's this.
I think the only ones who should go to colleges are men, because women are taking over the medical field and the dental field, which are taking jobs away from men, and they're hurting those fields because they're not nearly as reliable in those fields, because they have more health issues. Women in the workforce suffer twice the amount of stress-related illnesses, diseases than men. We weren't created for the stress of the workforce.
There is no winning. Pearl says if women want to be equal, we have to do the jobs men do. But if we do, then we're told we're not doing them as well as a man would, and we're taking the jobs away from men. I would also like Lori's source for the claim that women have more health issues than men, because I have a study here that says men die younger than women and they are more burdened by illness during life. They fall ill at a younger age and have more chronic illnesses than women. And I read that and my first thought wasn't, okay, well, clearly men are weak and not fit for life or work. They're useless. My only thought is, oh damn, how can we change that so men can live longer, healthier lives? It's so interesting that Pearl and Lori hear that working women are more stressed, and their response isn't, what's causing that stress and how can it be alleviated? Instead, it's, women aren't cut out for this, they're just taking jobs from men. Anyway, Lori goes on a rant about how college is just to prepare you for the workforce, and also, now, to indoctrinate you into the leftist agenda. And Lori was kind enough to tell us what the leftist agenda is.
Our world is being destroyed and we have to live with nothing and eat nothing, and die. So the world can be to have it.
I think Lori watches Fox News, but she doesn't actually pay attention. Anyway, Pearl jumps in about how her school was one of the first to allow trans people in the dorms, and she didn't really care then, but now she thinks they were trying to normalize it because trans people were walking around. Lori takes this and runs with it to gay marriage and how that was a slippery slope, and it's too late to reverse God's judgment on our nation. And, wow.
I was talking with a Black man at our church yesterday, and I was telling him, his wife's pregnant with her third. I said, is this going to be your last baby? He said, probably. I said, you know the roots of birth control, don't you? Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood. And he started nodding his head. And I go, Margaret Sanger's goal was to get rid of Black people. And 50% of babies being aborted are Black. And he said, oh, it was totally racism.
Imagine being at church and a woman comes up to you and asks about your pregnant wife, and then she starts talking about Margaret Sanger and birth control. For one, why would you do that? And for two, it's interesting how they focus on Margaret Sanger and not, for example, the Supreme Court, which was, in 1927, all-male, decision in Buck versus Bell that led to about 70,000 Americans being sterilized without their consent. Lori then moves on to the birth control mentality infecting the country and how we've killed more people in the U.S. than any other nation in the history of the world by far. Direct quote. Her mythology might be skewed, however.
When you consider the pill even aborts babies. And
the pill aborts babies?
Yes, it does.
No way.
Yeah, an embryo will implant in the womb, and then the pill will come in and shed that. So once it becomes an embryo, it's a baby. It's a human being.
That is not how the pill works, and I know Pearl isn't going to fact check that later. Of course, Pearl has already said that she would ban birth control if it were up to her, so one more reason to be against it is a win in her mind. Jessica Valenti recently published an article about the conservative battle to redefine contraception as abortion, and I'll link to it below for anyone who wants to check it out. Lori goes on to talk about a friend, and I have doubts about these stories, but Pearl credulously asks if all the birth control pills cause abortions, and Lori says yes, and then adds that they mess up your health, and then it moves to how her grandmother attended a church that equated drugs and doctors with demons, and so Lori didn't vaccinate her kids either. And somehow we go from here to detransitioners, and I'm just... y'all. What was the point of this conversation? To let Lori stream of conscience at Pearl and her subscribers? Pearl says, with all these policies, they're trying to play God, and what policies? Rather than explain what policies they're talking about, Pearl starts on how having 2 votes in a household takes away from marriage because women are supposed to submit to their husband's authority, and now you have 2 parties voting for different people. I find it interesting that Pearl assumes a married couple would be voting differently. I would assume a married couple would have more in common than not, but according to these two, marriage is all chaos and contention unless the woman submits. Lori pops out with this gem.
She's stealing his vote.
Yeah.
By voting opposite of what he does.
Did you hear that, ladies? If you don't vote the same as your husband, you're stealing his vote. It's really better that you can't vote at all for the sake of your marriage. Pearl segues into how this Christian couple that let her live with them and were so nice voted differently from one another, and the woman didn't want kids and was on birth control, and Pearl thought something was off because that wasn't what God wanted marriage to look like, but she was only about 21, so she didn't really understand. This leads to Pearl asking Lori what issues she sees in modern churches, and I'm sure you'll never guess what Lori said.
Women. Women take
based.
We got some big brains over here. Per Lori, women in church leadership positions destroy a church, and that's pretty much it. Women wanting power and false teachers who don't know scripture. She asks Pearl if she's Christian, and Pearl says she's Catholic, and she thinks the Catholic Church is starting to lose its marbles a little bit with the new pope and stuff. Poetic. Did you know woke people are infiltrating everything? Anyway, let's talk about President Dream.
Another guy, Anthony Johnson, he interviewed me, and he's not a Christian. He's an outright atheist. But he can see what's going on. He can see the wickedness taking over in our culture. And I told him, God has not turned you over to a reprobate mind. You still have a soft heart. And I told him, you do believe in God, because all creation shouts that there's a God. There are no atheists really, even though you say that you don't. But so you can see clearly, and it's just so strange that you, as maybe not a born again Christian, can clearly see the harm that feminism is doing. Yet so many women who claim to be Christians cannot.
Ah, yes, the evil feminism, tricking women into thinking they're people and that their wants and dreams matter. Terrible. So anyway, as I've said before, if the misogyny aligns, that's all that matters. Anthony is an atheist, and after speaking with Lori, he went on a rant about how Christianity is weak and beta and false, but he hates women, so he's a Christian in his heart. Would love some examples about how his heart is soft. Anyway, from here we move on to Pearl's biggest red pill moment.
And you know what, that was the biggest red pill moment for me was when I realized like college is feminism, because those are women's most fertile. And that's what I realized. I was like, chasing a volleyball, like led
instead
me,
of
like,
having babies.
Correct. Yeah. And it was like, I just couldn't even believe it. I was like, that was just what I thought we were supposed to do, you know?
First, 18 to 22 aren't the most fertile years, and it's creepy that people keep trying to push this. There's also more that goes into having kids than just your chances of getting pregnant each month. There's your health, your finances, your relationship, and college was not sneakily placed after high school as a way to deter people from having kids. As societies become more advanced, it's not a surprise that more education is required to keep up. And if Pearl thinks women should be getting married and having kids in their late teens to early 20s, why is she, in her late 20s, still single without kids? Anyway, college is feminism because college-educated women have fewer kids, and feminism started before the vote because birth rates began dropping in the 1800s. Apparently, feminism is when women have fewer children. Has it occurred to either of these two that humans aren't meant to have dozens of children? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Parenting humans involves more than just ensuring they're fed and sheltered. Lori says feminism started with Eve in the garden, Pearl laughs, says we're so critical as women, and then she asks for some relationship tips. Lori agrees that women are really critical, and that is why women are so contentious with their husbands, because we're discontent and we complain. Lori talks about how she was so sick during her children's childhoods, and then she informs us that self-pity is satanic. Apparently because you're not trusting God with your life. I think her tips are godliness and contentment and loving your husband the way he is. Lori also advises to start smiling at your husband, be kind to him, and treat him the way you want him to treat you. Pearl jumps in about how we have a whole generation of people who don't know how to do anything, and we are apparently basing this on Pearl learning to cook in her mid-20s because she was trained in basketball and volleyball for 5 hours a day. Lori says most women don't know how to cook these days. I would like a source for that, and what?
In a way, it's like it almost turned us into men because sports is something that men do. And what I realized too was that playing sports raises women's testosterone levels. So we're more competitive. It's like a lot of us have a little bit lower of voice. And it's a lot of I noticed like female athletes, a lot of us are daddy's girls. So it's kind of like we wanted to we're like
please your dad.
Yeah. It's like we're the son. They kind of raised us like a son, you know.
What is the basis for sports are something men do? Per a study, female athletes have naturally occurring higher testosterone levels, and exercise itself increases testosterone little to none for most women. Of course, Lori says feminism was to make women into men, and when she was dying in the hospital 20 years ago, she found out that men have 10 times more testosterone than women, and no wonder we're so different. Naturally, this leads to talk about trans people and how men's testosterone levels are lower than in the past, but have no fear, everyone. Lori knows the true agenda, and these two are having a great time.
I think the whole purpose of feminism and the leftist and satanic agenda is to destroy men. You destroy men, you could easily take over a nation. When you have strong, good men, you're not going to be able to do that. And that's what our nation was founded upon, was strong, good men who wrote an incredible constitution and designed our nation. So we live in a fairy tale of how the world has always been. America has been the greatest country that's ever existed. But the left's, Satan's agenda was to feminism, destroy the family. And the way you destroy the family is to destroy the men. So, and you destroy the men by getting the woman out of the home where she has no time for her husband, so they go off to porn or whatever. So it's just, it's working. Our culture has definitely, because women can't be men, no matter how much we try to be men, no matter how good a swimmer a woman is or how fast a runner is, a mediocre man who's a swimmer, a mediocre man is going to beat those women. And look at the cops, the women cops and the military. They're destroying the military. And firemen. Who wants, if you're being raped, you don't want to see a woman running to rescue you.
I said the same thing. I have said I just did this. I did a Talk TV, which is like a British TV station here. That's what I said. I said ban women from the police. Get them out of there.
The military.
Get them out of there too. We don't.
And the fire department. God created men to be the protectors of society. He had men 20 and older going off to war. He, in all throughout scripture, men that were protecting the women and the children. I don't understand women's mentality to even want to go in those professions, because you see these films of men, bad men and cops coming, and it's the male cops who get on the ground fighting them, and the women are jumping around. The women cops, they can't do anything. They're worthless.
Well,
they don't have the strength.
Some men are these super strong, awesome, good people, and they're destroyed by a woman leaving the house and having no time for her husband. And women leaving the house is women trying to be men. It is wild, though, watching these two get so smiley and excited about shitting on women. Pro segues into how women say they want a man who out-earns them, but women under 35 out-earn men in a lot of major cities. If you consider 22 out of 250 metro areas to be a lot, by monetizing beauty. I've linked an article below discussing why young women are earning more than men in some cities, and none of the reasons involve beauty. I suspect that Pearl's red pill mantra of women's value is beauty and fertility is what caused her to draw that conclusion with no evidence. Anyway.
Right. Kylie Jenner and Kim Kardashian might be billionaires, but they don't contribute as much to society as, say, Elon Musk or a similar billionaire. That's a guy.
Right.
And so it's like you have all these girls that think they're better than men because they make more. But a lot of times it's like, I got paid more at my sales job because I was a girl. Like it wasn't because I was a better salesperson, right?
I know, because the leftist agenda, and making everything equal.
How does Pearl know she was paid more as a salesperson because she's a woman and not because she was good at sales? And this also isn't a leftist agenda making everything equal. Paying women more because of their sex isn't equality, just like paying women less because of their sex isn't equality. But Lori goes on to tell us that they're not actually making things equal, they're punishing men, and she would rather have babies and grandkids than a career that makes a lot of money. So we have the situation where, in some cities, women under 30 make more than men. Per Pearl, this is because the women are capitalizing on their looks. Per Lori, this is because men are being punished. Their brains work in interesting ways. From here, Pearl asks what Lori thinks about women working, and I don't know why she bothered. Lori says again that women weren't created for the stress of the workforce, we get more diseases, we're more infertile, the divorce rate is higher, and it's also hard for single women because biblically we're supposed to be under our father's authority until marriage because God wants good men to protect and provide for women. And this is all men's fault.
And it's only because of men and what they built for us, and daycare, the birth control pill, public schools. Women could not have the careers that they have and do what they do without what men have invented and built and sustained. So it's all kind of a fantasy, actually.
It's interesting. They credit men with inventing birth control and daycare, but you mentioned they're having this conversation because of a woman who invented Wi-Fi and another who created computer programming, and that's nothing. Lori talks about a reality show she saw years ago about couples that went to go live like it was the 1800s, and the woman mentioned she was stuck in the kitchen while the men were out plowing because she couldn't do those things, and Lori says yes, that's how it was before men invented all these things that allowed women to act like men. So we should have stopped advancing as a society so women didn't get any ideas about their worth as people. She goes on about it's always men and never women doing the hard, sustaining work of culture, and Pearl gets very excited.
I'm waiting for there's a building being built next door. I'm waiting for all the women, the feminists, to line up and go build that building. Go on and be equal. And that's what I realized. I was like, women are fighting for equality, but we can't have it because we literally cannot do the jobs that make society run.
Don't be stupid. Women can and do the jobs that make society run. Just because you two say you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. There are female electricians, construction workers, road workers, and so on. It's wild to me how women couldn't even have their own credit card or remain employed if they were pregnant when Lori was born, and these two act like, okay, we're equal now. There are no more barriers to women entering traditionally male-dominated workspaces.
So why are we being paid more now under 30 in major cities?
Well, Pearl, perhaps if you actually read and absorbed things about what you want to talk about, instead of just forming conclusions based on the headline, you wouldn't have to ask questions like that. From here, Lori proposes a thought experiment.
Think if all of a sudden men just disappeared. All men just were taken away. How long do you think women would survive? Not long. Like all of a sudden electricity's out. How do we fix that? You know, who knows how to go to the major electrical things, whatever, or plumbing or the sewer system or whatever. So let's say all the women are taken out. How long would the men survive? Until they died off.
To these two, it's sad when a woman is working and unmarried. And to me, it's sad that these two just get to say things like this with no facts, no research, and people just eat it up. Because it's reinforcing their own beliefs that women are nothing without men, and for some reason, that is an important belief to some people. Sorry, Lori, I would be willing to bet that most women know where the breakers are in their own house. When it comes to more serious issues, people do tend to call in the professionals because they're professionals. There is nothing about being a man that makes you innately more knowledgeable about septic systems or electricity, and I think that's what they're trying to imply here. I think Pearl did come into this with some idea how she wanted to go, because rather than engage with this further, she asked Lori for her advice on picking a husband. And her advice is to find a godly man, because if they're godly, they're good, who is a hard worker, because you don't want a man who expects you to work and provide. Pearl asks about a man being 6 feet and making 6 figures, and Lori says no, though she guesses you have to be attracted somewhat, and she feels sorry for women in their 30s who meet these godly, hardworking men, but the woman isn't attracted to him. Per Lori, you can become attracted, which is true, but if someone doesn't want to see if attraction can grow, that's their business. Lori adds that it's important to have the same goals, and Pearl says she's shocked that Lori didn't want a 6-figure athlete or entertainer. Lori laughs and says no, if it's not Tim Tebow, she's not interested. She doesn't want a man who's used women. She also says it's important that your father approves the man. Pearl asks what a man should look for in a wife, and Lori says to have her read The Transformed Wife, and if she doesn't like it, don't marry her. Definitely don't marry a feminist, but apparently that's hard to do because feminists are everywhere these days, even in Christian schools. I'm pretty sure they're considering any woman who wants a career to be a feminist. And then Pearl goes somewhere strange.
The other thing that's tough is like women have so much more power in like from a young age when it comes to like sexual options. So I almost feel like sometimes young men in the church get taken advantage of by predatory women because they don't know any better. Because, you know, she's been sleeping around since she was like 15 because she can, but the average 15-year-old, it's just not the same, you know? And then, you know, 10 years later, or whatever it is, he comes in and like they kind of do the whole, not that, how do I put it? Not that I'm against like redemption, but I think sometimes like the church kind of tells guys to be naive. Like they don't warn them about predatory women as much as I think they should.
So Pearl is concerned that a man in his mid-20s might be taken advantage of by a woman of similar age because said woman has been sleeping around since age 15? What? Anyway, Lori goes off about how she did warn her sons she fully embraced purity culture, and her children thanked her for setting strict boundaries. Pearl asks Lori what she thinks the difference is between the kids that grow up to resent their strict parents and kids who grow up to appreciate it. Lori says she doesn't know, she and her husband were very strict, but their kids knew they were loved. And somehow we get from Christian parenting to...
You have a video talking about how women lose their minds after 40.
40. They start because of living in rebellion to their husbands. So for so many years, being contentious, that they go mad. And I've seen it with women. They can no longer really think straight. And you can't, bitterness, there's a verse in the Bible that says that bitterness defiles many. And when you're always angry, you're bitter. And bitterness, you got to pull that thing out from the root. You cannot have bitterness in your life.
What? Pearl asks for an example of bitterness, and Lori says that when she was so sick, her sisters were holding something against her, so they didn't come to see her for many years. And Lori decided she wouldn't hold that against them, and she would just love them and be kind to them, and now they have a close relationship, and one has even apologized. Pearl uses this to talk about women on her show that say they did so much for their boyfriends, and that was a red pill moment for Pearl because you're not supposed to keep score. And you know, I wouldn't say keeping score is a good idea, but at some point, you will notice if you're putting more more effort in than your partner is. This causes Lori to call Pearl very wise for a woman who doesn't know the Bible very well, and it wouldn't be a conversation with a fundy if we didn't hear this at least once.
I know that's totally just a self-centered, self-pity, selfish attitude. It's all about us instead of just forgetting ourselves and living for other people.
Do not do that. It's okay to have self-respect. Lori tells us how she used to be selfish, and she's so much more fulfilled and joyful now that she's serving people, which is very interesting because she's centering herself in that experience, despite just telling us we're to forget about ourselves and live for others. Pearl wants to know how Lori trained herself to do that, and her answer is a long-winded way to say Bible. Pearl then asks about the men prefer debt-free virgins without tattoos post that went viral years ago, and Lori says that started a good conversation, but it was shocking how many Christian women didn't agree with it. Lori says that that post was written for young women who haven't gone that route, and there's a lot of harm in going that route. But women who have debt and tattoos and aren't virgins can have great marriages if they repent. Lori notes that a lot of her writings offend people, and
what's the alternative? Tell them to sleep around, get tattoos, get a ton of debt? Like
I know.
People will say this to me and they'll be like, "You're not a virgin." I'm like, I'm not, but it's still a better route. Like, I'm not married. Like, it's a better route to go that way.
Better for who? I bet it would shock these two to find out that there are people who waited for marriage and regret waiting. Anyway, what does Pearl mean? What else is Lori supposed to do? It's not Lori's business to tell people how to live. Anyway, Pearl talks about how her cousin was homeschooled, and Pearl thought that was crazy when she was younger, but now her cousin is married with 2 kids, so the parents knew what they were doing. It's interesting that Pearl apparently now believes that marriage is the end goal, but still doesn't seem to be in a hurry for marriage herself. Lori says to look at us, we were created to have children, and men were created to give us what we need to have children. But feminists try to convince women they were created for the workforce. Honestly, it's like they're not even trying. To wrap it up, Pearl is going to give Lori some phrases she's heard on her show because she wants to see her reaction. This took up about 20 minutes of the video, but I bet I can summarize in less than 2 minutes.
I need a man who can handle me.
She needs a man she can reverence.
Men who care about body count are insecure.
No, they just don't like to think about a woman with a bunch of different men and comparing. If you would rather a woman limit her sexual partners because you're worried about being compared against them, that sounds like insecurity to me, but anyway.
I don't cook, I don't clean. Let me tell you how I got this ring.
Per Pearl, this includes some sexual acts and is a popular song teenagers are singing nowadays. Lori says that's so sad, except it's a song and most teenagers, thankfully, aren't getting married. They talk about how women are more sexually available to men before marriage than after, and Pearl uses this to say she encourages working through cheating rather than divorcing, because if you stop sleeping with a man and he cheats, what did you expect? And let's hear Lori's advice and keep in mind that she considers herself a Titus II woman and a mentor. This will come into play in a future video about a popular influencer.
But I had a woman, she was my Bible study leader, and her husband had an affair, and she had 3 children. And she had determined she was going to win her husband back. So even she remembers one time even helping him wash his car and waving goodbye as he went off to his girlfriend. But she fought. She fought by loving him, praying grace upon him. She won him back. It took him a year after they were together. He finally apologized. I have other women I've mentored who've won their husbands back after adultery. And they went on to do premarital counseling at our church for years and had a great marriage until he died. And other women who've won, multiple women I know who have won their husbands back after the men have had affairs, and they have their husbands are thankful that they didn't, divorce them and destroy their family. They don't want to destroy their children's lives because that destroys children's lives. Divorce does.
It's interesting how, if an affair happens, it's assumed to be the woman's fault, and it's also the woman's job to fix it so the children's lives aren't destroyed by divorce. And if anyone is wondering, Lori says Christians should never divorce except in cases of physical abuse, and Pearl says anyone who believes in divorce should just stick to relationships because it can't be marriage if the average marriage is 8 years. And we somehow get from marriage to MGTOW.
Because now it's like you have a whole movement of men that are going their own way. And I understand it because with the way the laws are, the way they are, the women have so much leverage in a marriage, and we can leave over anything, and there's no guarantees for the guy.
No-fault divorce benefits everyone, not just women. It's much better to be able to divorce than to have to make up a reason a court will accept. I assume that Pearl thinks because it's usually women who file, it's just women who want a divorce and the men are still desperately hoping to save their marriage, but no. I'm sure there are times when one spouse is blindsided, but in most cases, both people know their marriage is in trouble. And as for leverage, what leverage? After divorce, women's household income falls by 41% compared to men's 23%. And if Pearl is thinking about alimony, that's only awarded in 10% of divorce cases, with 3% of recipients being men. Alimony is not just given. There has to be a reason for it, like staying home to care for the kids, and it doesn't last forever. And if Pearl thinks kids are the leverage, something like 90% of custody cases are decided outside of court, meaning the parents themselves decide the arrangement. And yes, women do tend to receive custody most of the time because women are still considered the default caregivers. That is why women tend to receive more child support and alimony than men, not because the courts are biased toward women or it's some perk of divorce only women receive. It's because even now, women are still the ones most likely to give up their careers and devote the most time to caring for the family. And I'm not buying that these two don't know that. They just choose to ignore it for their own purposes. Anyway, from here, Lori says people want her to give the exceptions, but she just wants to teach the rules. Pearl agrees, which is interesting because Pearl loves the exceptions when they make women look bad.
So now you're going to start going to a solid biblical church and find a godly man, huh?
Yes. No, I wanna. I'm Catholic, so I like the Catholic Church.
Well, I know that I know some Catholics who seem to be strong believers, like Abby Johnson and Matt Walsh. They speak more like a true believer in Jesus Christ than a lot of Christians. They're reading your Bible, talking about Jesus Christ a lot.
I have to say, for someone who thinks women should get married and have kids, Pearl doesn't seem too enthusiastic about doing so. Disclaimer, this is my opinion, but I think it's because she's become pretty well known for her beliefs in how women should behave in regards to men, including how women having social media is cheating. So getting married would mean she'd have to give up her career, though I'm sure she could find a way around it. But in all honesty, I don't think Pearl is that eager to find a man to submit to. Anyway, Lori gives Pearl some Bible passages to read, and Pearl says she missed going to church and she's moving back in with her parents this fall, and this will be her last season playing volleyball because she can't do it all. To which Lori, of course, says,
"Get married and start having babies."
Yeah, I'm trying.
And then you can
go.
Maybe it's just me, but I really get a lack of enthusiasm from Pearl about getting married and having kids. That was pretty much it though, and wow, that was a lot to get through, and I'm still confused by how Pearl has so many subscribers. I know people like to watch women be humbled and all that, but is it really that entertaining? This video was long enough, so just kidding, we're not quite done yet. Pearl tries to play it off as though she's on men's side, she's helping men, she's saying things other women won't say, but how is she helping men? Sure, she'll play up to a man's ego, talking about how valuable he is to society, but how does that help men? What about men who don't do those jobs? What about men who can't? Why are you putting a man's worth on the work he does? What about men who want to date women? And here's Pearl telling them how awful women are. And then, in a weird twist, Pearl also creates a boot camp to turn women into wives, which makes no sense. If you think so little of women, why would you want men to marry them? And Pearl just said in this video that she understands why men don't want to marry today. She's giving a very mixed message, and I don't understand how anyone can fall for it, let alone so many. All she's doing is hammering nails into the box society tries to put men and women in, and that does no one any favors. On the bright side, her Whale Watchers program has gone from 13 to 8 members. I guess it's harder to grift women when you've spent a year denigrating them. Okay, now I'm done. I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.